Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Kuh, and today we are joined with Pitcherless Dynasty writer Trevor Powers. We're going to talk about his recent Ultimate Draft Guide to the College Baseball Playoffs, which unfortunately this episode comes out on Saturday, so they've started the day before. For us, we're recording this on Thursday, so they start tomorrow for us. But when you call this the Ultimate Draft Guide, you are not kidding. This is a deep dive into every single regional, which we are just going to touch the tip of that iceberg. But yeah, Trevor, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. Doing well. Really excited to preview this weekend in college baseball. Like you said, this comes out on Saturday. Maybe we'll have some good results, and hopefully, I don't sound too stupid when we get to that point, and I don't say anything too matter of factly that we have results and evidence to back up on.
Yeah, well, I mean, regardless of what happens, right, it's going to be on the internet forever. So,
Yeah.
well, yeah, looking forward to that interview. But later in this episode, we're also going to go over latest news and notes around baseball, recap a few hitter and pitcher performances from this past week, and of course, some stream recommendations at the end of the show. But before we get into all that, just a reminder that you can follow our podcast on Twitter at ThisWeekPL. You can send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform you listen to. We're on all of them: Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you follow us and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Now, Trevor, you've been on the pod before, but for folks who haven't maybe listened to those episodes or maybe haven't necessarily checked out your work on Pitcher List, just give a quick introduction. How long you've been writing for Pitcher List? How long you've been kind of been interested in Dynasty? And I know your kind of path in baseball and this has kind of gone through, playing yourself in college, and I think coaching a little bit too as well, right? So yeah, maybe just kind of give a little bit a snippet of kind of how you've got involved in this space.
My passion for Dynasty actually started when I joined a league with a couple of my college roommates, and I was still playing at the time, but that got me into the fascination with the prospect and evaluation and making decisions and those kind of enjoyment with my friends in college. And then the writing side of it, which I believe I've been writing now for Pitchers List for, I want to say 3 years, three plus, around three at some point. I think it's been a blur each and every year. But I think my first year was the 2024 draft, which was an unbelievable class and definitely one that I enjoyed covering at that time. And my passion's always been a little bit more on the draft side of things and being able to evaluate these players as amateurs, specifically in the college game, where I have a lot of connections, friends, and people that I can rely on for information and data sources and those kinds of things to provide some better analysis or some deeper analysis. I don't want to say better, deeper analysis on some of these players and potentially how they project into professional baseball to help dynasty owners make those decisions when first year player draft time comes around.
Yeah, I've definitely been somewhat interested in the draft. It's always kind of a weird thing for baseball fans, I think, because it happens in the middle of the season. They've kind of made it a bigger spectacle nowadays, kind of lining up with All Star Weekend. But it's also one of those things where it's like you get excited about a guy, and then now you have to wait, 2, 3 years for him to come up. As a Twins fan, though, because we've been drafting kind of at the top half of the draft for the past couple seasons, it's been nice to be a little bit more excited about some of these higher octane the prospects essentially, and just seeing what they could do. So definitely appreciate your work. I always enjoy reading it or editing it whenever it comes across my schedule. So I appreciate all the work that you and really the rest of the dynasty team does. Even within the baseball season, and then obviously during the off season as well. We are going to start, like I said, this is the ultimate draft guide to the NCAA baseball postseason, and it truly is extensive. As I was kind of prepping for this interview, I was like, wow, you really wrote a lot, and we are covering maybe a third, I think, of what you wrote. So definitely recommend check out the article. It will be posted in the show notes, obviously. But we are going to start off with Roch Cholowsky, UCLA shortstop. I've been looking around. Basically, all the projections have him at number one. I mean, we'll see what draft shenanigans happen, I guess, with signing bonuses, all that. But it looks like he should be going number one. And yeah, how has his season at UCLA gone this year? Obviously, they're hosting a regional, so that's nice. But what does he have left to prove that he's really deserving of that number one pick status?
Yeah, so Rock is fascinating, right? Because I think the biggest detriment to his season this year was prospect fatigue. right? We've known about Roch Cholowsky. There's a good chance he would have been a first round pick in 2023 if he had chosen to come out of high school. He started as a true freshman and hit 300 at UCLA in 2024. He was unbelievable and probably should have won the Golden Spikes Award last year and sneakily did it in the Big Ten. And then they backed their way into the College World Series, where a lot of people started to really gravitate towards the name and recognize it as the most likely candidate for 1-1. And there hasn't been anything that he's done to hurt his stock except being there at the top for so long. I actually believe that it's easier to go number 1 overall if you're quote unquote unranked or not in the first round coming into the season than if you start the season as the number 1 player, just because of people. The more people see, the more they're going to attack some flaws and identify some things in your game. And that's been the conversation around Rock a little bit this year, is the success against high level pitching. Now, his UCLA team, they went down to Arlington. They faced Mississippi State. They faced a couple high level pitchers, and he was the best player on the field each and every time that he came up to the plate, and also played an elite shortstop defensively. Just in the swing of Big Ten play, there were highs, there were lows. From a data standpoint, he's no different than he was last year. I think the biggest difference is there was a little bit of regression in the power department, couple less doubles, couple less home runs, which you can kind of chalk up because he was basically almost a 2020 guy last year and almost had 40 extra base hits. So it's just one of those scenarios where I think if it was a blank name and a blank face that we hadn't known coming into the spring, he wouldn't have anything else to prove, and his stat line and his success this spring would make him a shoe-in to go number 1. But I just think the new toy tends to sometimes take the limelight away from somebody the longer they've been frontward facing and in front of the community. And that's been the main thing I think that has changed a little bit of the narrative around Rock, and maybe some people questioning his success against high level pitching.
I mean, yeah, the stats are still really great, right? The slash line 321, 455, 660, right? Like those are just numbers that just indicate he dominated the competition. Even in the Big Ten, which I mean, I have a soft spot for, but it's easily probably what the third best conference in the nation,
Mhm.
right behind the SEC and the ACC. So it's good to see at least that when he goes down and plays those SEC teams, like you mentioned, that there's still that high quality there that you can see from him, where he might not get that on a weekly basis in the Big Ten. Rest of the UCLA team, though, you have like four other names listed here for other names to know. Are they going to win it all? Do you think? Or I mean, College World Series is always so variable, so that's really the hard thing to say.
Yeah, it's so tough because I always say it's like 3 different seasons in the postseason, right? And this is both from my experience talking to coaches in the industry and then also being in this scenario where you play a regional and it's a 4-team invitational, and it's a sprint through a weekend of having to win 4 or 5 baseball games, and you're rewarded in the regular season for winning games in snippets of 3 with 1 a day, right? And then the postseason is determined by winning multiple baseball games in the course of a weekend, potentially up to 5, and your depth that sometimes hasn't been tapped into or needed, and these guys are thrust into the rotation or the lineup and expected to perform when the lights are the brightest. And I think that's where this UCLA team, it's been nice to see a couple guys not step up. Their lineup's really deep and well-rounded. We've known that for the course of the year. But Cal Randall, who I've talked about, he's a bullpen arm, but he's been a guy that's been popping up each and every week because of the velocity that he's able to throw with. He's touched a 100.7, I believe, is his max, and it feels like that's something that he's gotten to more and more each and every week. And being able to rely on a guy like that who doesn't need to start, that's when you know a program has like real championship level depth, is when you have a 100-mile-per-hour arm who doesn't have to go out there and log 4 or 5 innings and put strain on their body in that way, and they're able to just go out there for 2 or 3 in the bullpen and maybe bounce back later in the weekend. So I think again they've gone pole to pole as the number 1 team after a College World Series. The number 1 team hasn't won in a really long time. I don't know exactly the last number 1 national seed that has won a national championship, but they're in about as good of a spot as any. And this team has been together for 3 years. They all came in as freshmen in Cholowsky's class in 2024. They started as freshmen, and then now they're trying to put the bow on their tenure there at UCLA. And I think they have a really good chance, but SEC has been pretty dominant in national champions in baseball for a while here. So there's going to be a couple other teams that are going to give them a run for their money.
Yeah, well, Big Ten seems to be dominating college sports at least, in
Mhm.
national champions. So maybe
Yeah.
UCLA can be the next team to do that in this college season. So you mentioned depth. Moving on to the Atlanta regional, this Georgia Tech team is loaded with first round talent. Obviously, Lackey, who's probably the top catcher in the draft. Drew Burris as well, who would potentially be a top 10 guy based on kind of what I've seen from some mock drafts. And then there's also Jared Advincula, who you also list in the article too. So three guys who potentially could go in the first round. What do you like from all of these? Maybe let's just start with Lackey. What does he bring to the table as a a catching prospect?
So Lackey is fascinating because I did a comps article probably about a month or two ago,
Yeah, I remember
and
that. Yeah.
Lackey's profile reminds me a lot of JT Realmuto. And again, I made the caveat in the article that like I just want to reach for the stars with these guys and have a little fun doing it. I get JT Realmuto is one of the best catchers in the sport, has been for years. He's had a great career. Expecting a kid in college to do that is very not normal, right? But the reason I say that is because Lackey's skill set, one, he actually played 9 positions 1 game earlier this spring. He's super athletic. He's showed an ability to steal bases with 14 for 15 this year, so there's actually a speed element to his game, and I think it's one of those things where he's so good athletically that he could play anywhere on the field, and that makes him such a better catching prospect, and that's why I was really intrigued about Lackey coming into the year, but he was more of a contact-oriented, bat to ball first hitter, and this year he just showed up and the power numbers went through the roof. The exit velocities within the first weekend were showing more bat speed. He was showing more just high end level exit velocity, and it directly translated to power output. He matched his career total in home runs within the first like 4 weeks of the season. That's how hot he came out of the gates. Now, there was some form of regression at some point throughout the spring, but then he brought it back in the as he rounded out the ACC season and came into the ACC tournament. I believe he hit somewhere around like 450 since like April 21st, I want to say. I think I pulled back some of his data and the power returned in a big way. And this is a guy who has consistently shown 80 to 85% contact rates, which would be 60 to 70 grade in my book of in terms of the data I've looked at. And then you add the power element at a premium position like catcher who can still run and shows athleticism. It's a really exciting profile. And the second the power showed up, I was starting to have conversations with a lot of people in my group of friends that I stay in contact with and saying, like, I know Rock is Rock, but Vaughn's gonna have a conversation come draft day if a team really wants to zig or if the White Sox really wanna zig while everybody else thinks they're gonna zag.
Yeah, I mean that nine position game that you mentioned, that's crazy. I did not know
Yeah.
about that. So that's pretty nuts that he accomplished that. But yeah, you look at the profile, I mean 18 homers this season, finished with a 410, 527, 780 slash line, which is just crazy. I mean, we just said rocks, slash line, and arguably, uh, it seems like at least the average skills were a little bit better for Lackey this season. And definitely an improvement over last year, which I think is what you want to see from a player as he matures. What about Drew Burris? What do you like about him?
Yeah, so Drew kind of falls a little bit in the rock category where we've known about Drew for so long. He came out his freshman year and immediately hit what felt like 20 home runs in just non-conference play before he even stepped foot in ACC play. And he was obviously one of the best freshmen in the country at the time. And he took a little bit of a step back last year. And obviously there were some concerns, but the power is legit. I call him a fire hydrant. He's built a lot like me, where it's like 5'9", but he's wide and he shows a lot more strength in that way. So he's thicker and he's able to he does it in a little bit more of an unconventional way where he uses his legs big time in his swing and that's where he generates his power. And it's just been I think people wanted to see a little bit more of that big step forward. The average took a huge step forward, but I will say, at least in terms of what this Georgia Tech lineup is sometimes that's just contagious, right? When you have a lineup that hits 358 as a club, you're hitting 366. Are you really showcasing the step forward that everybody had wanted? I think as a group, they wore down pitchers, and the power was just, regressing. 14 is still really impressive, and he had a 660 slugging percentage, but there's just so much more that I think people wanted to see from Drew, but the data has always been pretty good. He's a little bit below what I would hope from a contact percentage for a smaller guy, but the exit velocity and the thump showcases, and it's one of those kind of profiles that I still think there's some development that'll need to happen in professional baseball. I don't think he's as ready-made as what Vaughn and Roch have shown this year, but I think if he gets into the right situation with the right offensive development, there's no reason he can't combine his good enough contact rates with some thump and the ability to hit to all fields, because that's one of the things that he does really well is he does have opposite field power, and he's able to stay on it for right center field, and, he can be a well-rounded hitter. I just think people were expecting a larger step forward after the freshman year, and it never really showed up.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his freshman year stats: 25 homers, 381, 512, 821 slash line. Just yeah, crazy numbers. And then yeah, the last 2 seasons, like they haven't been bad, as you've mentioned. They're just not as good as that freshman year, which probably is a little bit of a knock, unfortunately for him. I'm kind of curious because you kind of mentioned his size and kind of his build, and yeah, he played outfield at Georgia Tech. This really is not going to impact too much for fantasy purposes, but I'm curious whether a team sees a makeup like that and says, "Oh no, this guy's a first baseman."
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Again, he moves pretty well. A lot of people grade him out as an above average center fielder, and he's played a lot of center field for them. I will say Georgia Tech is a small yard, right? So not a lot of ground to cover. That's kind of a theme in college baseball. You get into professional baseball, and those outfielders are a lot more spacious, and center fielders have to go and get it a lot more frequently. So I think at the very least, he's probably going to start professional baseball on a corner is more than likely, especially with his size, because maybe there's somebody who wants him to add a little bit of LBs. I mean, he's a bigger dude, but maybe they want him to focus on just like gaining that strength and being able to really showcase his power, which is again his best skill set. I mean, you mentioned that freshman year stat line. You're talking about an 800 slugging percentage as a freshman. I think people are going to want that player to show up.
Yeah, yeah, they'll take him whatever position he
E
plays. Yeah,
exactly. If you're hitting
yeah,
30 home runs, again, I had this
yeah,
conversation with a college coach yesterday. We were talking about outfield defense in college baseball, and I said, that when I transferred for my last year of college baseball, my, head coach came up to me, he said, "Do you know the most important defensive metric for an outfielder?" And I went on this, like, like,
yeah,
all this stuff, and he goes, "Slugging percentage."
yeah,
Like, checks
yeah,
out. Yep,
yep,
okay.
yep. That makes sense. Well, moving from Burris to Advincula, it's kind of you mentioned in the article. It's kind of guys with two different skill sets, right? Advincula a little bit more contact focused, but still gets power, so 24 extra base hits. Obviously, the number that stands out is that 431 average from him. But yeah, Advincula transfer also to Georgia Tech, although funny enough stays in the ACC because that's how college conferences work nowadays. Even though you transfer from California, you stay in the same conference. But yeah, what do you like about Avicula? I mean, I think he's been kind of slowly making his way up boards as the season has gone on. But yeah, what's kind of to explain behind this rise for him?
Yeah, so I've actually had this conversation a lot, and you've seen a little bit of professional organizations pivot to profiles like Advincula, where it is contact oriented, which means it's safe, right? In terms of the production you're going to get. And I think orgs are a lot more attracted to that right now and that skill set than they maybe were when they were getting infatuated with the power and the tools. And again, there's different profiles that have been successful. There's not one way to just identify players, but I think that we're seeing a little bit of a shift in professional baseball that this skill set, when you're rounding out your lineup and rounding out your roster, you're preferring to add guys that are stable, right, in terms of the outputs. You know they're gonna put together a competitive at bat. You know they're gonna be able to put pressure on the defense. They can move runners if they need to. They can play the short game. Advincula is not a huge speed guy, but he's able to kind of tap into that a little bit. It's just more of a bat to ball focus. And one of the things that I've looked at the major league level is and not to compare one to one, there's years between. One was a high school kid, so and draft, but you look at the skill set like this and you think of like the rise of Bryce Terang over the last couple
Mm,
years, where he's just kind
yeah.
of gradually grown into more power. Well, Vincula's actually shown decent exit velocity numbers. It's not going to overwhelm you, but it's in the 58th percentile in college baseball. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's like, hey, if he could just get 10 to 15 homer power with maybe 20 doubles, and he's going to put together a quality at bat. He's probably going to be a high batting average guy. You're looking at 310 average. Again, this is peak that we're talking about. We're not talking about expecting him to do this. I think a lot of people are a lot more attracted to that profile than maybe they were in past years when they would rather take flyers on the MVP potential player.
Yeah, I think I've seen that a lot. With Minnesota, frankly, with some of the guys that they've drafted.
Mhm,
Walker Jenkins kind of comes to mind. But also I think Cleveland's done this a lot where, they'll get guys who have really good bat to ball skills, and they're like, we can teach them power in the
mhm,
minors, right? We can kind of develop that. So not that they become like a 30 to 40 homer hitter, but can they get 15, 20, kind of like that Bryce Terang model you're talking about, where it's like, hey, this guy, he's not necessarily lighting up the field in terms of just hitting bombs every single day, but 2020 plays really well with a high average
mhm.
in real life and in fantasy baseball. So those guys, it's the reason why Luis Rise, even though he doesn't really offer much beyond average, still gets drafted in most leagues because that's still a really good skill to have.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we are going to move away from Atlanta and we're going to go to Chapel Hill. And I want to talk a little about Ethan Norby. Fun fact, I met his dad when his brother Connor Norby and the Marlins visited the Twins a couple years ago because they're actually from the Minnesota area. They had like a bunch of family visiting the game. I was like, oh, interesting. I didn't realize he was a Minnesotan, so that was kind of cool. But he's not as well known as some of the other guys in this regional. I believe he's also pitching at Eastern Carolina, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
He's at East Carolina. So he's not, from necessarily from, one of these big name, ACC or SEC schools. And yet, you have a lot of praise for his pitching ability. Um, the other big name in this regional is Tegan Coons, who I've seen in draft boards as a first round pick for sure. I was just looking at some numbers. Kylie McDaniel at ESPN had Norby ranked as 60th on his most recent draft prospect ranking, so it kind of gives a gauge of what the industry is seeing right now for his value. But what do you like about Norby? What kind of makes you think that there's a lot of potential here for him to be a good pitcher at the next level?
It's swing and miss stuff, right? And I think that over multiple years, last year and this year, where he's logged about 150 innings up to 170 innings, you're looking at 120 strikeouts in back-to-back seasons, and that's before he's obviously thrown this weekend. And I talked to a pitching coach at an SEC program one time, and we were talking about stuff plus, and he's very forward thinking. He's very, advanced in the way he views it. But he said the one complaint he's always had is he said, hitters tell you the story, right? And just we had a full conversation about him saying hitters will tell you the story about how good a guy's stuff is. And we've had guys that have graded out on average stuff plus, and they go out there and they punch dudes out. And I think that's Norby. Norby does it in a way where he is 5'10", and so he doesn't look the way that you see the big burly pitchers that get a ton of strikeouts and you expect it to be. But there's something he's doing that has consistently messed with hitters for 2 straight years, and when there's swing and miss stuff, there's something there to build off of that translates to the next level. You also combine that with really good walk rates over the last 2 years. He's 88th percentile in walk percentage over the last 2 years, and he just has this innate ability to fill up the strike zone. I watched him last year pitch, in the postseason at their regional in Coastal Carolina, and he was unbelievable. He was the best player on the field. He was dominant, and that kind of stuff just stands out with you when you're able to, and he did it against an SEC lineup in Florida, and you're just able to remember those moments and say, "There's something this guy's doing that even if it's not 100 miles per hour, it's confusing the crap out of hitters, and it's gonna be able to build off of that." And then you see some of these guys where if they get into professional baseball and they add velocity, it's like a high level starter right there. Or if they know learn how to use, I mean, he's pretty much 30% sweeper, 40% fastball, and 18% gyro slider, which are all grayed out as above average and do really well. Um, if he adds a little bit of velo here or he adds a changeup that's able to balance out righties, like you're looking at a high level starter who can throw strikes.
Mhm. Yeah, so you mentioned the stuff. I mean, the number that leaps out in your article is 120 strikeouts in 83 innings, right? So an insane strikeout ability there. But yeah, I was looking at his stats, and the thing that stood out to me was actually just like, oh, but the walks are actually pretty decent too.
Mhm.
This year his WHIP hasn't been as great, 1.375, but last season, um, admittedly, it wasn't his first season. It was probably his first season like full time starting. Probably is maybe the accurate way
Mhm.
to say it. But yeah, the WHIP was down at 1.067. Had 119 strikeouts there in 90 innings. So just still really good numbers there. And this year, looks to be just as good. I'm kind of curious because I know you kind of have your own little like stuff models for college pitchers, right? And you were just kind of talking about how like sometimes stuff is more than meets the eye, so to speak, and just like looking at it at a strict number. How does Norby kind of rank among the other college pitchers that are coming out to the draft this year?
So he was yeah, I mean, he's 100th percentile in college baseball, and again, so my metrics are built on college baseball averages, so really anything from 10 like 110 to 115 and above is gonna be 100th percentile, so he's amongst
Hmm.
the league leaders in the nation, and he's at 115 as a repertoire. I'd have to look because I have it, like, communicating through 2 different
Sure. Yep.
pages, exactly what some of those things are that stand out to me, and cause that, but every pitch he threw was in, like, the 110 range, and again, for anybody who's familiar, I told you this off air, this is for college baseball specifically, so we're using college baseball averages, so that doesn't mean he has a 115 stuff plus in professional baseball right now, so I figured I'd definitely add that caveat if somebody's like, "This guy's unbelievable and should be dominating," but the stuff definitely registers as more than serviceable in professional baseball.
Yeah. I do want to mention Tegan Kuntz because he's probably the hottest player in this regional. Uh, Maybe he pitches game two. We'll see. Maybe
Mhm.
hopefully we're not spoiling anything with
Yeah.
if he pitches game one. But yeah, what's the kind of the intel on Kuntz? Why is he basically ranked so highly among pitchers that are coming out this year?
So it's a bully fastball, and his fastball, it's a combination of elite extension, low release, high vertical approach angle. So he's able to attack the top of the zone with his pitches, and he's generated a 30% whiff on the fastball, which based on just metrics alone of college baseball, usually you're looking at like 22 starts to get into like the really good territory. To be up there around 30 for a fastball alone when that's been his about 50% usage pitch is unbelievable, and his ability to utilize that at the top of the zone. I mean, it's one of those that you watch him throw the fastball and it's like, oh, you can see the rise and ride on it on TV. It's like,
Hmm.
wow, that's yeah, that thing has like a legitimate upshoot. I think the breaking balls could be better. He hasn't really found one that's his go-to. He uses the gyro slider a lot. It hasn't generated like elite whiffs. It's been like solid in the whiff category. He generates more whiffs with his curveball, but he doesn't use it a lot, which I think that's always one thing I flagged as like kinda tells me a little bit of a story about maybe what they're most confident internally at Tennessee. So it's not as a well-rounded of a repertoire as Norby's is in terms of, like, 4 legitimate pitches that he's comfortable using, but there are going to be organizations, I think of the Mariners right away, that are gonna look at Kuhn's fastball profile and believe that that's something that they can maximize because they've shown the ability to maximize it with several guys that do similar things. And I would be shocked if there's not an organization that takes a not a flyer, but falls in love with him in the first round just because of the fastball shape.
Yeah, that makes sense. Basically, it's like, hey, he's got one really good pitch. Let's see if we can
Yep.
teach him. I mean, at this point in baseball, you really just need one other pitch if you've got one
Mhm.
really really good one. But
Yeah.
that's interesting to see. Just like it's all about really how he's really good at one thing, and
Mhm.
that's what's driving the stock. I do have to talk about, as a Twins fan, Jackson Flora. We just talked about Von Lackey, who, that there's a good chance he also could be drafted by the Twins. But Flora is the guy that I've seen mocked to the Twins a lot. He's the best pitcher, according to all the rankings I've seen. Um, what just makes him good? What is it about Flora that makes this guy, kind of must see TV? Is even from a guy who basically pitches in a mid major, at Santa Barbara.
Yeah, so we talked about Flora for a little bit off before we clicked record, and there were points in the year where, again, there's always going to be that elephant in the room of mid-major competition. But he went 35 straight innings or something along that lines of shutout baseball, hadn't given up a run. He was dominating hitters. He was throwing a ton of strikes. He was just doing it in a way that had it been in the SEC, everybody would have been talking about it. I mean, I think it might have made its way onto MLB Network, to be honest with you, with the dominance that he was displaying. And I think there's always been that little, elephant in the room of Jackson Flora of, well, if he did it at Texas or if he did it at Arkansas, we would really be buying in to the prospect hype. And so that's one of the things that's just a fascinating conversation. But when you talk about the stuff, he's huge. He's like 6'5", I believe, and he's like long and he generates elite extension. And even as tall as he is, because of his extension, his release ends up being lower than you would think for a guy as tall as him, and he's able to attack the top of the zone. And last year, that was kind of his thing, right? He just threw the fastball and he had a couple other pitches that he used off of it. But at UC Santa Barbara, they had Tyler Bremner drafted 3rd overall last year. They have another pitcher behind Flora who I can't recall on name that's throwing 100 miles per hour as well. They've become somewhat of like a pitching factory here in the last couple years. And he spent the offseason, he reworked his slider to be more of a cutter shape and the ability to use it with high velocity, added the sweeper to kind of grab that east west, that big breaking pitch that I have as a 117 stuff plus, and he added a changeup that at the beginning of the year when he had really good feel for it was grading out around 110, 115, I think major league stuff plus. It kind of kicked back on him, and I think once he got into conference play and he was losing feel for that, he kind of reverted back to like, let me just play bully ball and throw my fastball cutter sweeper, and I'll get a lot of outs that way. But the consistency of the curveball is the difference between giving him a legitimate weapon against lefties, or the changeup, I should say, against lefties that makes him a pitch repertoire of a guy that grades out 78th percentile in walk percentage. So you're looking at a guy that, again, when we look at 4 pitches with one as a legitimate offering to get lefties out, and we've also seen the cutter or tight gyro as an offering to get lefties out as well, with the east-west pitch to get righties out and the high vert fastball and the ability to throw strikes, it's very hard not to look at that profile. He could be playing against anybody in the country and be like, that's pretty exciting in terms of what his future outlook could be.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe what makes this regional so interesting, right? Because you look at his opponents, and this is not a knock at all on any of these players. I mean, Cal State Fulton had their run as a baseball powerhouse for quite a while, but it seems like the only power conference team he faced was Oregon. And it was like a decent showing. He had 5 strikeouts, and pitched 5 innings. Did have 3 walks, so don't love that, but um he gets to face some big names. I mean, Texas is the one team right now in this regional. Obviously, they're hosting. That it seems like that's going to be the interesting matchup to see if he gets to face them.
Mhm. It would be fascinating again, and very rarely does a 2 seed hold their starter to Saturday, because they have to win against the 3 seed, obviously, to get to the winner's bracket, and that game 1 is, like, the most important game in a regional, and so it's one of those ones where, like, you circle the matchup of, like, when you see those teams lined up against each other, and you're like, "I don't know if it's gonna happen, but if it did, that would have
Yep.
been a lot of fun with the lineup that the Longhorns have."
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, so I kind of want to bring this up just to see if you're going to say anything interesting. But how does he compare to like other top pitching prospects that have gone in the top 5 of the draft the past couple of years.
So I wasn't a huge fan of Bremner, and I think that's kind of the Angels' process is he was very major league ready, but very
Yeah.
safe. I think he's better than Bremner, and I think a lot of people thought he was better than Bremner last year. I'll give it to you. I'll say it. I told you I snuck it into an article at the midway point of the season, and I knew because my mentions didn't blow up that I nobody caught wind of it, obviously. But I guess we'll we'll test my luck again. I think well-rounded repertoire-wise, has a better pitch mix than Skeens had coming out of LSU. And I explained it as Skeens was truly able to play bully ball with 101, 102, and it was fastball slider. He still didn't have the splinker. He didn't have the sweeper. He didn't have all these things. And the Pirates took an absolute great decision on the person, and he's developed every year. I mean, Skeens comes back this year and he's crossfire and throwing strikes, and he's just such an elite command artist. That's the thing I also will not say. Like Paul Skeens, I've said this to people. Is actually to me the modern day Greg Maddux because his command is that good. Like it's crazy to think that a guy throws 97 and he's got that kind of command, but that's what makes Paul Skeens elite and a unicorn. So I'm not even going to compare that. But from like a pitch repertoire standpoint, I was starting to see four pitches that can be a legitimate weapon in professional baseball immediately upon getting there with enough strike throwing ability to be excited. I mean, we look at Burns has two better pitches, and that's showcased immediately. I mean, this is how his fastball slider was in at Wake Forest, and he's still the same pitcher as he was then, and he's able to bully guys with two 70, 80 grade pitches. I think Jackson has more of 60s with a 50 in the changeup. So it's like 360s and a 50 in the changeup, but it's exciting to look at like a guy who potentially has four pitches that he can use immediately with strike throwing ability that I think could make him a super like play his best baseball, even as good as he's been, but play his most entertaining baseball as he continues to develop.
Yeah, and I guess before we get too crazy, like Skeens had an insane season at LSU. I'm just looking at these numbers here. They're still nuts. Like 20 walks in
Yeah.
122 innings, a .75 whip. So, it's doing that and limiting hits at the same time.
Yeah.
A 1.69 ERA. And Flora this year, definitely not bad, but he's had let's see it's 30 walks in 94
Mhm.
innings.
Yep.
So, the command is a little bit lower, but it's still a .88 whip, right? Really doing a good job at limiting hits, 124 strikeouts. So, it's really more kind of you're saying it's kind of the pitch makeup right now.
Yeah.
But obviously command is a huge thing. And
Mhm.
that's something that can obviously be taught. But honestly, big ups to the Pirates coaching staff for being able to kind of coax the best version out of Skeens
Mhm.
so far. Because yeah, it's as good as Flora is right now. Obviously, it's going to come down to the coaching staff of the team that he goes to and how they're going to continue to develop him to potentially become an ace. Because we've seen a lot of these guys come out in the draft with really great stuff, but kind of amount to nothing. When
Mhm.
after they go through the minor league process.
That's what makes this side of it so hard because you can say so matter of factly anything, and player development is the most important thing. I mean, baseball is a sport where the number one overall pick isn't always the best, and then they
Yeah.
find 12th round picks. I was actually having this conversation. My brother is an Orioles fan, and they have two number one overall picks that aren't performing up to superstar level. And then you look at their conference rival in the Yankees, and it's like, oh, here's this 10th round pick out of Dartmouth that they found playing summer ball during the pandemic. And it was like, and he's top 10 hitter in the sport. And it's like player
Hmm.
development is the biggest differentiator. And that's why you see teams that consistently draft in the top 5 to 10 because they haven't figured out the player development thing. I think evaluation with data that we all have access to, again, even in the private sector and in the public, it's not rocket science that anybody's out here trying to do things differently, but it's just getting them into your player development ecosystem and maximizing what they're able to do, and that's the most important thing, and even Roch Cholowsky could struggle with the White Sox if they don't put him in a position to be successful, even as confident as we are in his evaluations.
Right. Yeah. Shout out to the Ivy League developing
Yeah.
legitimate baseball players like Ben Rice. All right. Well, next topic is a player that you've actually written a deep dive article on recently, and I think I've seen him go from a guy who's falling out of the first round to a guy who could be a potential top 10 pick. And that's Justin LeBron out of Alabama, going to be playing at home in Tuscaloosa for at least this weekend. Um, at risk of kind of just repeating what you wrote in your article, what makes LeBron so polarizing? And is there anything he can do kind of in the next couple weeks to, maybe change that narrative a little bit?
Yeah, I think having success against high level pitching would do him a ton of favors in the evaluation from professional organizations because I think, at least from my perspective, um, people want to fall in love with him because of the athletic traits, because of the skill set, because of just he's a great defender. He does everything really well. It was just a matter of coming into the spring. I referred to him as a schoolyard bully. And I didn't really envision that it was going to play out the way it did, but he had a tendency to hit big home runs or have big weekends against lesser competition, and then he would kinda go quiet for a little bit of time, and then you'd hear him pop up for maybe a weekend and have a good weekend. It was just inconsistency. It was a very much a roller coaster ride. And a lot of that was on the backs of he had contact swing and miss issues, especially against high level pitching. And then also he was a very hyper aggressive hitter. And what we tend to see in as competition improves, those flaws get elevated, right? And that's the fascinating part that I know I wrote in the article about LeBron is I was so coming into the article like I'm going to kind of go into this in a way where I try to be more positive when I do my breakdowns, but you always have to, a couple years back I think back to my Vance Honeycutt conundrum, and that hasn't worked out in professional baseball because of these things that I kind of targeted as limited contact rates and a ton of chase in his game, and he really didn't like he faced Burns that year, and it was like 0 for 8 with 7 strikeouts over 2 games. And so it was like really something that stood out as worrisome. But the interesting part about LeBron is his contact rates and his chase percentages got better this year. So statistically, he went backwards, but his data got better. And I think that that tells me like sometimes in baseball, people think of these immediate year over year adjustments and fixes, but especially in player development in college baseball, there is a conversation that coaches have to have where this might not be the best version of LeBron in professional baseball, but if we make these changes, it's going to benefit his future, right? But it might hurt our team this spring and hurt him this spring. But if he makes this development, that's going to be the big leaguer Justin LeBron version that we're going to have to see. So I ended up writing the whole article to get to the end and be like, he's actually, like, sneakily gotten better, at least in my perspective, and, like, my good graces of, like, I'm seeing the changes he's making, and I think he just ran into sometimes slumps are just, like, more mental than they are physical, and when you're struggling against SEC competition, it speeds up on him, and batted ball luck is always a factor, and so it's an interesting because if he goes out and Oklahoma State doesn't have high level aces, but they have velocity, and if he just goes out and shows well against a couple 95-mile-per-hour arms this weekend, and maybe they get into a super regional and they line up with, I think Florida, I wanna say, or no, they would be with Georgia Tech, I believe, if I'm mistaken. If I'm not mistaken, I have no idea. I'm doing that off the top of my Florida State. Sorry. I apologize. Bad podcasting out of me. Florida State, who has 2 high-level starting pitchers in Wes Mendez and Trey Beard, that would be the one that the more baseball Alabama plays, the better off it's gonna be for Justin LeBron, assuming he can handle his own and really put on display the improvements that he made.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you just look at his stat line, which I mean that's kind of the only context I have, right? It's like, wow, his batting average dropped by 50 points, right? Like, his OBP actually is maybe the most impressive thing I think I see out of him because it's despite that drop in batting average, the OBP's kind of managed to stay up just a little bit, and he's still walking a decent amount, right? 26 walks on the season. And then you look at that 38 stolen bases number, you're just like, oh, I get it. Like that's
Mhm.
why this kid's fun to watch. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting kind of what you're talking about, how that swing and miss stuff, right? We, for the most part, we just see a number, right? But guys who are watching him every day, or his coaches, or guys like you that have a little bit more granular data, um, there's a little you can see that improvement in his game as he goes on. It's not just like a guy who's striking out a ton. I
Mhm.
mean, he's still getting on base by an impressive amount, and able to make an impact on the game, even when his batting average is
Mhm.
so much lower this season.
And that's why evaluators love him, right? Like, it's the 38 stolen bases, he's a premium defender. I mean, I don't think his last name helps him, like, even though he's not related,
Sure.
like, I just like, I
Yeah.
genuinely believe at least I know people that do college baseball and media, and, like, from an SEO's perspective, like, Justin LeBron just does better, so he's kinda like one of
Yeah.
those
Of
people
course.
that's, like, funneled out,
Hmm.
for a multitude of reasons. I will say the batting average part, it's really interesting because while major league organizations obviously don't care as much about batting average, it is one of the things that when you're evaluating in college, there's like a benchmark that you want to see because just the way the game plays, no shifts, no defensive positioning, as detailed as it is in professional baseball. And when it's really exposed, it's exposed usually in swing and miss, like Justin LeBron has showcased. So it is interesting that, like, again, he's actually improved his contact rates, but his batting average gone down. And I know that's going to be major league orgs are going to knock that because if you hit 260 in the SEC, you probably aren't going to hit in double A, right? Conversation, which is completely fair. And it's just a fascinating, again, like he is, again, I had this conversation about Vance Honeycutt in 2024. It's like either he's going to be an MVP candidate or he's never going to make it out of single A. And nobody knows
Yeah.
that answer.
I can't remember. I don't think we had you on the pod to talk about Vance Honeycutt. But I do remember talking about him with and we might have had you on the pod to talk about him, but I just remember like being like kind of excited about him, but also just like a little apprehensive. I ended up picking him up in my first year player draft, although I think he like fell to like eighth or ninth, and I was like,
Mhm.
this is value that I can't pass up at this point. It hasn't worked out, so
Mm-mm. Not yet. He had
that's
that
been
fun. He had a couple homers in spring training this year, though. That
yeah.
was
That I was like following it a little bit. It's like, hey, he's doing something, but yeah, unfortunately, no, he's still in the minors.
yep.
Um, So yeah, we're gonna just kind of cover those five players or not even players, those five regionals. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about. But out of the other regionals that we haven't discussed, which there's 11 other of them because there's 16 total regionals, so a lot of baseball this weekend. Um, do you have a favorite one that you're going to be paying attention to out of the ones that we didn't discuss? And is there kind of a player, could be that regional or just maybe just one that we haven't mentioned in this episode that could provide some pretty interesting stories either this weekend or just as the tournament goes along?
Yeah, so the one regional that I have circled, and it will be after or before this comes out, but in Lincoln, Nebraska, the 2-3 matchup between Arizona State and Ole Miss. Very rarely do you get two power conference teams matching up in on a Friday in that sense. And it's Cole Carlin who's going to go for Arizona State, who has seen a meteoric rise up draft boards this spring. And he's 75% sliders, which is and he has like a 52% whiff on the pitch. Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's like it's basically one pitch, here it is, hit it,
Wow.
and nobody can hit it. And Cade Townsend, who's also a high riser this year, who has more of a well-rounded repertoire, and they're going to battle it out on Friday, which I think is going to be super entertaining. Another regional that I have a close eye on is the Georgia regional. Georgia is the most powerful team in the country offensively. They lead the nation in home runs. Their ballpark plays small. It plays even smaller in the summer. They come to you with a lot of velocity on the mound, a lot of stuff. Wes Johnson, former pitching coach, obviously, with your Minnesota Twins. And what makes that regional exciting is Boston College is the opposite. It is a small ball run, put pressure on you in a couple different ways. Todd Interdonato, who was at Wofford for a couple years and then took the Boston College job, he built this offense around just creating pressure in different ways as a way to kind of almost win in as like a lesser funded program in bigger conferences. And obviously that's translated directly to Boston College. So if they match up on Saturday, we're probably going to get potential first round pick Joey Volchko going up against that Boston College team. Daniel Jackson's been he's the SEC Player of the Year. He's been unbelievable. We'll be able to see him as a catcher defensively controlling the run game and being able to see how that game plays out. But I can imagine a lot like it's basically like if you put slugfest on in college baseball, it's stolen bases, it's home runs, it's high velocity, and that's what the Athens Regional has to offer. So those are definitely two that I'm excited to see. Florida versus Miami. Miami hasn't been as good as I know they were last year, but that's a rivalry. So anytime you get two programs that really don't like each other, that usually ends in some intense moments, especially in college baseball, where nothing is off limits for some of these kids in terms of celebrations and some of
Sure.
these things. So that could be an exciting one that I wouldn't expect. I would potentially expect some fireworks as the weekend rounds out.
Yeah, so stay tuned for the bat flips is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, that Gainesville regional will be interesting because I mean the other name to mention there is Liam Peterson, who has kind of been neck and neck with
hmm
Flora in terms of who's the best pitching prospect in
Yes.
this draft, and
hmm
well that definitely will be an interesting one to see how that all goes. So
Yep.
yeah. Well, appreciate you coming on the show, Trevor. Obviously, these deep dives are a lot of work, so really appreciate all the stuff that you're doing there. What's coming up next for you on Pitch List, and then how can people kind of follow you on Twitter or get in your mentions to maybe pick a bone with something that you said today.
Yeah, so coming up is we're gonna start getting into like our real draft prep, top 25 pitchers, top 25 hitters, probably a mock draft somewhere in the month of June. So really honing down on a little bit of our deeper list and getting into one of the things that I don't try too much to speak on as high school players, and obviously I think there's a pretty good crop, specifically at the top is Grady Emerson's a name that we obviously haven't mentioned because he's not in college baseball that a lot of people are excited about. So we're going to start to provide a little bit more insight on the deeper list of getting to 25 on the hitters and pitchers. And if you want to find me, just search me by name, throw in the mentions. I'm not on my Twitter as much as I used to be. So if I don't reply back, maybe just send it twice. Maybe I'll catch it the second time. But I would obviously appreciate any feedback, even if it's somebody telling me how wrong I am when I say some things.
Well, we definitely appreciate your expertise here on the podcast because I know I've learned a lot just from some of these names. And again, Twins have a high pick, so inevitably they're going to pick probably one of these guys that we talked about,
Yes.
unless they decide to go high school, which I can't imagine they've had a really fun run of that recently. So it's always interesting to kind of see what the college game is like. Obviously, as a Minnesotan, we don't necessarily have the greatest baseball teams up here. I mean, we've had some nice runs. Obviously, Max Meyer is like the one big
hmm
name that's come out of Minnesota the past couple of years, but um, yeah. So appreciate you obviously shining a little bit of insight into what's going on in college baseball.
I'll give you a little bit of hope for the Twins at 3. After kinda getting into the weeds after a couple weeks when we started to collect some data, this class is a lot more 2024-esque than it is 2025-esque. I think last year
Okay,
I wouldn't
I
wanna
like to hear that.
yeah, I wouldn't wanted to have to draft in the top 3 last year. It was a flip of the coin. That's why so many high schoolers went is because I think there was no college options to the extent that people wanted. So I think that people were like, "All right, well, we're gonna take flyers on 18-year-olds and see which ones athletically develop." This year is a lot more of the guys like Cholowsky, Lackey, obviously we didn't mention Gracia, Chris Hacopian at Texas A&M, which is another regional that has some excitement, and Caden Sorrell, Chris Hacopian, who I love. Chris Hacopian's like a data darling, high contact, ton of exit velocity, just needs to tap into more power, and I think it's gonna happen in professional baseball. Like, all 5 of them are gonna grade out better than any of the hitters did from last year. So, I think the Twins are as long and Grady Emerson obviously is gonna be
Yeah.
there. So I would say out of the 4 that could be picked between Roch, Vaughn, Jackson Flora, and Grady Emerson, you can't go wrong. Now player development's the next step,
Yep.
but you genuinely
Exactly.
can't go wrong with that.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Trevor. Appreciate you coming on the show.